Greetings, my fellow freeload sovereign thinkers. This is LL3's News Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy mangroves of South Florida. And today's date is Wednesday, July 26, 2017. Very warm out there indeed. It is completely understandable. However, I'm at CJ's Java Lounge, located at 400 Southwest 1st Avenue, Suite 1 to be exact, along the New River of Florida, in the New River Yacht Club, which is southwest, along the southwest section of the Andrews Avenue Bridge. Yes, it is warm, sunny, nice breeze along the river. Like it out here. A little bit genuine. That's the way I see it. Everyone's doing the concrete, like to rather hang up on the palm trees and all that good stuff. Yeah, it's interesting. It looks like the House passed that sanctions bill on North Korea, Iran, and Russia. So I just sent a nice little letter to Ted Deutsch, who was one of the many that was for it. It was 419-3. And I congratulate him on choosing poorly. If we go to war with these countries, will he be going on the front line of battle? Let's see how tough these folks are. The reason why I made that statement because sanctions is an act of war, an antebellum towards physical conflict. And I always condemn that. Doesn't matter what party you're in. And I know some people really are critical about the transgender ordeal. What Trump is going to be getting rid of some folks who are transgender in the military. Trump to reinstate military ban on transgender people. That's, of course, CNN. I've looked it up too on the Daily Star. So it's going to be up in arms on that. The whole thing is hospital, medical different reasons and all that. I always support the rights of individuals with all sincerity. Of course, Madison, we don't know he's behind it. The war-mongering demagogue that he is. Based on his attributes. And, of course, I will talk about Jeff Sessions and Trump snapping at Sessions on him recusing himself on the so-called Russian ordeal. Then he's back into the leaks. But you know what? Couple of areas which I find it very disturbing on Attorney Sessions. One, the drug war. Once gets the feds more involved. He brought that out. Two, give law enforcement leeway on doing what they want. That includes civil forfeiture, civil asset forfeiture. He should be called out on that. Anything that's considered breaching his oath of office. Supposed to be the top dog of justice. And wiping his behind on our Bill of Rights culture within the federal level. Every state in the union needs to be the guardian of the people's rights, natural rights, due process, etc. I recommend, even in Florida, if the feds come in and do civil asset forfeiture, the sheriffs will tell them to get the hell out or we'll throw your ass in jail. And it can be done. 10th Amendment. Sheriffs are the most powerful people in their municipality. And even the governor can say the same thing. Get out of my state or I'll have your ass arrested. Any questions? Look up the anti-commandeering doctrine once again. Prince versus the United States. 10th Amendment. That's why the sanctuary cities was considered legit to an extent when they tried to do the funding. Like I said before, I'm not too crazy about it because I understand the criminal elements. But the states can make that different. Texas passed that into law. Sanctuary cities are abolished in the Lone Star State, which is a 10th Amendment issue. Just to give you folks a little education on those areas. So, speaking of foreign policy and a few other things I'm going to be discussing, let's just look at some of the stuff here. It'll be, a couple areas let's decide to read about. And this one came from New Eastern Outlook by Stephen McMillan. Came out today. It's entitled, "Is the U.S. Trying to Start a Hot War with Russia?" Another day, another major escalation of tension caused by U.S. actions. The recent downing of a Syrian jet by a U.S. F-18 Super Hornet is just the latest installment in a series of U.S. provocations in Syria since Donald Trump took office in January. Excuse me here. The non-interventionist commander-in-chief has continued to expand the wars launched by previous U.S. leaders, as Trump has essentially given the military carte blanche to do whatever it wants, from using white phosphorus in Iraq and Syria to sending thousand more troops into Afghanistan. The U.S. military machine remains completely out of control. But why did an American fighter jet shoot down a Syrian warplane? Will the U.S., which is operating illegally in Syria, justify the action by saying that the Syrian jet was targeting U.S.-backed forces on the ground in the form of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF? The Syrian government said that the jet was on a mission against ISIS militants who created thanks to U.S. backing. Understandably, Russia responded furiously to the illegal U.S. action. Eskali Pushkov, the head of Russia's Communications Policy Committee, described the strike as an act of war. The Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said in relation to the incident that, was it then, if not an act of aggression, an act directly in breach of international law? If you want, it's actually help for terrorists, and the U.S. is fighting, declaring that they are conducting a counterterrorism policy. As tensions ratchet up to new levels, Russia has warned the U.S. that they are now tracking U.S.-led coalition jets that fly west of the Euphrates River as potential targets, baiting Russia into a military response, although the official U.S. narrative was that they were producing U.S.-backed forces on the ground. One cannot help but question the justification used by a country that has repeatedly lied and deceived in order to launch imperial wars. There is a very danger that the decision to shoot down a Syrian jet was designed to provoke Syria to respond militarily to U.S. forces, therefore providing justification for a full-scale invasion of Syria by the U.S. and her allies. Moreover, and more dangerously, there is a potential that this incident was designed by rogue elements with the U.S. to provoke Russia to respond militarily to the U.S. in Syria, providing justification to start a hot war with Russia and launch a preemptive nuclear attack on Russia. Although this may sound like madness, we should not underestimate how mad the neocons are. The U.S. and Russia have reportedly already come extremely close to direct confrontation in Syria earlier this year. In April, after the U.S. launched 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles at the Syrian airfield, Russia was an inch from confrontation with the U.S., according to Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. Any followers of Dr. Paul Craig Roberts' work, the former Assistant Secretary Treasurer for Economic Policy, who has also worked at a variety of U.S. think tanks in Washington, will know that he has repeatedly warned that some belligerent and crazed elements within Washington are actually considering launching a preemptive nuclear strike on Russia. It is not just Dr. Roberts that is warning of this apocalyptic scenario. However, at the end of April, the deputy head of operations of Russia, the Russian General Staff, Lieutenant General Viktor Poznyzker, so you hope I pronounced that person's name correctly, warned of the potential that the U.S. could launch a sudden nuclear missile strike against Russia. The presence of U.S. missile defense bases in Europe and missile defense vessels in sea and oceans closed down to Russia create a powerful covert strike component for conducting a sudden nuclear missile strike against the Russian Federation. U.S. anti-ballistic missiles in Eastern Europe and in other regions can not only be used to try to intercept any retaliatory Russian nuclear missiles fired toward NATO countries in response to a U.S. preemptive nuclear strike, but as Vladimir Putin has repeatedly warned, many of these defensive systems can be quickly turned into offensive systems, used to launch nuclear missiles at Russia in a sneak attack. This is part of the reason why Russian officials have repeatedly called the U.S. anti-missile shield a threat, with Romania hosting a $800 million section of the shield, painting Russia as the enemy. Before any war, the state always embarks on an outlandish campaign to demonize a target in the eyes of the people. One logical conclusion to be drawn from the incessant array of anti-Russian propaganda that has been promulgated by the West in recent years is that it is designed to inculcate in the minds of the Western public that Russia is the enemy, preparation for a future war. In recent years, the world has become increasingly more unstable. Tensions between Russia and the U.S. have reached a level not since the height of the Cold War, with some even arguing that we have surpassed this point by now. The U.S. is continually provoking Russia as the hawks in Washington cannot stand the fact that Moscow has stood up to the neocons in Syria. Perhaps the U.S. is trying to intimidate Russia so that it backs down. But this is a very dangerous game to play. How many times can the U.S. poke the Russian bear before the bear responds? Very few know the answer to this question, but the central point is that the U.S. must stop asking the question in the first place. The world stands on the edge of a dangerous precipice as it slides towards war. Well, that is the question. Rogue elements within the United States, not the United States as a whole. It's been talked about attacking Syria very long time ago. They've been trying to use the pipelines for almost the past 50 years. The people are tired of bloodshed in their country. What would happen if you had the Russians or Chinese troops around the borders of the United States and Canada? How would the United States react? Or near the 12 miles of the national waters or airspace? Would the people like that? Always recommend that the United States stop being an empire. Let the banksters go to war. Let's see how tough those pieces of garbage really are. Probably out of shape, like rolling blueberries from the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So I will tell this to the President Trump and his cabinet. Stand down. Do not pursue this by any means, because everyone would suffer. our brothers and sisters from both ends of the world, the nations. Tired of this, we got to attack this country, we got to do this. It's nothing more than a monumental deception. Something to really look at. And all those neocons, all those Trump worshippers, got the Obama worshippers, all that too. So just an example. Stop looking at these folks as kings. You have to really analyze. This has to stop. No war in Syria, no war in Iran, no war in Russia. Let true peace, security, spiritual prosperity prevail. And I don't mean through the United Nations. All right, next one here came out yesterday from the Unzi Review. It's alternative media selection. I'm going to have to check these folks out. Real curious about them. See how they are. So I might just I may just check this out. Ooh. That'll be the next thing. So this one came out. It says here, America's Militarized Police, Made in Israel. It is by Philip Giraldi. The horrific execution by a police of an Australian woman in her pajamas that took place last week in Minneapolis has again produced a torrent of criticism over killings initiated by law enforcement, situations in which the officers are in no way threatened. America has always been a violent place relative to much of the rest of the world. But even so, there has been a noticeable shift in how, since the trauma of 9/11, some policemen believe themselves to be superior and detached from society they are supposed to be protecting. And the public is reciprocating, seeing the police frequently as a force that is no longer there to serve the people and instead something that should be feared. Even in the upper middle class, predominantly white county that I live in, residents not infrequently discuss the increasingly visible and aggressive police presence. It is widely believed that arguing with cops or showing even the slightest attitude in contacts with them is done at one's peril. Even in low-crime parts of the country, police are able to deploy fully armed and equipped SWAT teams that are more military than civilian in their threatening demeanor, as well in the body armor and weapons they carry. Many cities and counties now have surplus military armored vans for crowd control, even if they had no crowds. Armed drones are increasingly becoming part of the law enforcement arsenal, and it sometimes appears as if the police are copying the military as a model of how to do it. The various levels of government that makes up the United States seem to be preparing for some kind of insurrection, which may indeed be the case somewhere down the road if the frustrations of the public are not somehow dealt with. But there is another factor that has, in my opinion, become a key element in the militarization of police in the United States. That would be a role of the security organs of the State of Israel in training American cops, a lucrative business that has developed since 9/11 and which the Inter Alia gives the students a whole different perspective on the connection of the police with those who are being policed, making relationships much more one of an occupier and the occupied. The engagement of American police forces with Israeli security services began modestly enough in the wake of 9/11. The panic response in the United States to a major terrorist act led to a searches for resources to confront what is perceived as a new type of threat that normal law and order training does not address. Israel, which is in current occupation of much of Palestine and the Golan Heights, has, as well as former stints in Gaza, southern Lebanon, and Sinai, admittedly has considerable experience in dealing with the resistance to its expansion manifested as what is described as terrorism. Jewish organizations in the United States dedicated to providing coverage for Israel's bad behavior saw the opportunity to get their hooks into the sizable and respected community within the U.S. that was a ripe for conversion to the Israeli point of view, so they began funding exchanges. Since 2002, there have been hundreds of all-expense-paid trips including officers from every major American city as well as state and local police departments. Some have been sponsored by the American Jewish Committee and the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs. The Anti-Defamation League has also been directly funding trips since 2008, explaining as people living under constant threat of attack, the Israelis are leading experts in security enforcement and response strategies. The intent to learn and draw from the latest developments so the American cops can bring these methods back home to implement in their communities. AIPAC has several pages in its website dedicated to security cooperation between the two countries. And there's a link for that so you can see it for yourselves. And it asks, did you know in May 2010, 50 retired generals and admirals wrote to President Obama highlighting the value of U.S.-Israeli cooperation? It goes on to cite an Alabama sheriff who enthuses that there is no other country, Israel, that shares the same values and overreaching goal to allow others to live in peace. Regarding airport security, it also quotes a U.S. security expert who states should move even closer to an Israeli model where there is more engagement with passengers. We just stated to do that at TSA. Indeed, that's called profiling and pre-board interrogations. Police state, do-lang, bend over for the state, do-lang. Just like that. Even the federal government has gotten onto the Israel bandwagon, perhaps not a surprise given the number of Israeli firsters in Congress. In 2003, the Department of Homeland Security established a special office of international affairs to institutionalize the relationship between the Israeli and American security officials. The New York City Police Department has a branch in Israel and carries out frequent exchanges. It should be noted from the get-go that Israel is no more knowledgeable about possible response to attacks to acts of terror than is anyone else. The techniques employed to create physical barriers, to develop sources for intelligence gathering, and to train in tactical response are quite familiar to anyone who has studied modern-style terrorism since it emerged in Western Europe in the 1970s. Most countries that have a high or even moderate risk level deriving from terrorists, either domestic or foreign, have recruited and trained special police and paramilitary forces that are familiar with the basic techniques are quite capable of responding. Ironically, even though the United States government and local police forces have tended to look at the real pro-Israelis for guidance, state-of-the-art resources and learning about how to deal with terror are available right here at home. The GSOC has teams that are every bit as effective and lethal. Anything the Israelis can muster and the CIA and FBI together know far more about terrorists and how they behave than do the ideologically driven Mossad and Shin Bet. The American police who go on exchanges are probably only dimly aware that they are being shown as part of Israel's military justice system, which nothing to do with Israeli criminals. But instead is designed to keep the lid on the millions of Palestinians who live in what has become a virtual outdoor prison camp. It is an apartheid police state that uses deadly force as a form of crowd control, and the Palestinian former residents on the land of Israel, the lands Israel now holds, are the terrorists that Israeli is protecting itself against. So it's like, yeah, we'll just take you over. If you counter, you're the bad guys. Always questioned that when I was a kid about the whole how Israel became, a nation and the transitions and so forth. But I will proceed here. You can bet that the American guests, for their part, clearly do not realize that they are being trained as prison guards, and you can be sure that they never catch so much as a glimpse of the 300 child prisoners that Israel continues to hold without charges. Indefinite detention? Hey, Barack Obama supported that under NDAA, and I believe too, Alan West is like, yeah, it's a good move. Please. Israel's reputation for dealing with terrorism has, in any event, been glamorized by the Israeli-friendly media and entertainment industry while also being promoted by Jewish organizations. It has meant, in practical terms, that many of the contract security firms operating at airports in the United States and Europe are Israeli. They have also infiltrated state homeland security agencies and corporate security in the U.S. Many of the Israeli companies with offices in the United States work closely with Mossad and might reasonably consider to be arms of the Israeli government. Could we say Israeli empire? In the works, where Israel really excels in its willingness to kill large numbers of Arabs of all ages and genders using the excuse that they are terrorists. So everyone that is non-Jewish or non-Israeli in their realm are terrorists. It's done so with impunity because Israeli courts almost never hold the army and police accountable for whatever they do. Can we say coincidence? Oh, yeah. It might reasonably be suggested that when American police officers go through their training in Israel, they are required at least a bit of that attitude from their instructors. Recognizing that Israel is not exactly a model to be emulated when it comes to human rights of its Palestinian victims, there is an alternative viewpoint which suggests that American law enforcement might be learning the wrong things when it travels to Israel. Can we remember? John Jay warned us about this on article on Federalist Papers 2 through 5 on foreign influences. Amnesty International asked, with whom are many U.S. police departments training? With chronic human rights violator Israel? It notes that last August, when the Department of Justice documented numerous violations by the Baltimore Police Department, the report failed to mention that policemen from that city had received training in Israel. Woo! Let's be like Israel, struggling with God. That's what it means in Hebrew. Amnesty makes clear what we are dealing with. Our policemen are being trained, military, security, and police systems that have racked up documented human rights violations for years, carrying out extrajudicial executions and other unlawful killings, using ill treatment and torture, even against children. Suppression of freedom of expression, association, including through government surveillance and excessive use of force against peaceful protesters. And actually, it is worse than that. American visitors will be welcome to contemplate the Potemkin village miracle of a democratic, multicultural, inclusive, clever Israel. They will not be allowed to see how soldiers train them, represent the most moral army in the world, force Palestinian women to give birth at military checkpoints and watch their babies die, shoot Palestinian teenagers as they are running away for throwing stones, drag men and women out of their beds, and kill them while terrorizing the children and drag them off to jail during midnight raids. Amnesty articles document many of the abuses by Israeli security forces and concludes that using public or private funds spent to train our domestic police in Israel should consider of us all. Many of the abuses in the U.S. parallel violations by Israeli military, security, and police officials. I would also add that the training provided by JINSA, ADL, and the AJC is also partly on the American taxpayers' dime, as the organizations are all tax exempt. I was never fond of these organizations for a very long time. First one was the Anti-Defamation League. I call them the Gino organizations. Jew name only organizations, okay? Finally, Israel's ability to market its state-sponsored brutality has even become a form of light entertainment. A company in Israel called Caliber 3 that was set up by a reserve colonel in the Israeli army is offering what has been described as a 2-hour boot camp terrorism experience. It concludes a life-size target of consisting a man in Arab attire holding a cell phone. The mostly Jewish American audience ponders if he should be shot, but the instructors eventually intervened and declared that he does not quite meet the standard for being killed. Prisoners also treated the simulations of Israeli commandos taking down terrorists and can even shoot live rounds from a semi-automatic weapon at a firing range. Ironically, the Caliber 3 gated compound camp is located at the Gush Etzion settlement block on the West Bank land that was stolen from the Palestinians. Wow. So, something to really look at. And of course, a little history on what's been happening. So, it is very dangerous, my friend, on what's been happening with militarizing police in the United States and so forth, and trying to give them immunity to do whatever what they want, especially when you hear, like, presidents of the time, Nixon, who's not around anymore, and then Donald Trump in his campaign speech when he was a candidate, I'm pro-law enforcement, we'll be a law enforcement nation. That is very not intelligent thing to say. And the folks that go up in arms and applaud should be get a good smack upside their head. This is why, like I said, I'm not condemning the Israeli people, because a lot of them out there are really protesting against this and have rallies. They're sick of seeing the Palestinian brothers and sisters getting tortured, getting taken out and dragged out, because you know what? If that ends, who's going to be next? It's called cancer. You got to destroy it. And I've examined their basic law, and I wasn't really too impressed. So I don't know why people say, oh, yeah, they're a democratic nation. Read their constitution, the basic law. You'd be like, wow. You know, not enough really vague detail on human rights over there. So this is why you got to read, observe. Don't listen to lobbyist groups or bobbleheads. I don't like this at all. So I boldly oppose this. And it has to stop. It's time for us to end the empire, get all these foreign lobbyist groups out of the United States, and includes the Vatican City. That's right, Vatican City as well. Get them out. I'm trying to tell us how to think and when to wipe our butts is totally unacceptable. And go back to the original Constitution at the least. Organic, not the corporate one from 1871. Not more than garbage as far as I'm concerned. It is pretty controversial. But pretty good stuff here. So I'm going to head on next. It's interesting. There's a reference to Venezuela. Came out yesterday by The Independent. David I put this out. I shared this. CIA hints agency is working to change Venezuelan government. It is by Andrew Buncombe. It says here, the head of the CIA suggests that the agency is working to change the elected government of Venezuela and is collaborating with two countries in the region to do so. And one of the clearest clues about Washington's latest meddling in the politics of Latin America, CIA Director Mike Pompeo said he was hopeful that there can be a transition in Venezuela, and the CIA, is doing its best to understand the dynamic there. He added, I was just down in Mexico City in Bogota a week before last talking about this very issue, trying to help them understand the things they might do so that they can better outcome for their part of the world and our part of the world. All right. Mr. Pompeo's comments delivered during the Q&A session at a security forum organized by Aspen Institute think tank have sparked outcry among supporters of Venezuela's government. President Nicolas Maduro, who was elected in 2013, has denounced Mr. Pompeo's remarks and hit out at the governments of Mexico and Colombia. The director of the CIA has said the CIA and the U.S. government worked in direct collaboration with the Mexican government and the Colombian government to overthrow the constitutional government in Venezuela and to intervene in our beloved Venezuela. Mr. Mardo said in a televised interview, according to Telesur, I demand the government of Mexico and the government of Colombia to properly clarify the declarations from the CIA, and I will make political and diplomatic decisions according before this audacity. The U.S., which is currently gripped by the allegations that Russia sought to interfere in the 2016 presidential election, has a long history of interfering with democratically elected governments in Latin America, from Chile to Nicaragua and Argentina to Haiti. And you can see the videos here as well from that footage showing armed attack in Venezuela. Okay, and look, so you go see that. And it's a BBC News. And I'll continue on here. In Venezuela, it sought to weaken the elected government of both Mr. Maduro and his predecessor Hugo Chavez, who was briefly ousted in a 2002 coup. Some of his efforts have been distributing funds to opposition groups through an organization such as the National Endowment for Democracy, while some has been in the form of simple propaganda. In May 2016, unidentified U.S. officials told reporters in a background briefing that Venezuela was descending into a deepening crisis that could end in violence. They said they doubt Mr. Maduro was not likely to be able to complete his term, which is due to an end after the elections in late 2018. Mark Weisberg, co-director for the Center of Economics and Policy Research in Washington, said for the past 15 years or so, it had been U.S. policy to seek a change in the government of Caracas. They've been trying to get rid of this government for a long time, and they feel they are getting closer than ever, he told The Independent. The development comes as both Mr. Maduro and his country face mounting problems against a backdrop of food shortages, soaring inflation, and civil unrest. As the president has been accused of restoring and mounting authoritarianism, the opposition has called for him to stand down, and there has been widespread protest, and there's a lot of photos in here as well. You can really see it for yourselves on what's been happening. So I will just that's a different different. This is actually in Bangladesh. Sorry about that. Opponents are furious about his plan to press what they vote for a constitutional assembly on Sunday. Critics said the rules of the assembly appear to assure a majority for Mr. Maduro. But Reuters said that Mr. Maduro, 54, insists it is the only way to empower the people and bring peace after 4 months of anti-government unrest that has killed more than 100 people and further damaged the economy. The question of Mr. Pompeo was asked last week by businesswoman Vanessa Newman, who said she had dual U.S. and Venezuelan citizenship, and who said the regime change looks to be hope, imminent, or spiraling down. She added, I'm interested in your open assessment on American interests in or threats from Venezuela, and which, of course, has Russian, Iranian, etc. interests, and for the region. He responded, I'm always careful when we talk about the South and Central America and the CIA. There's a lot of stories. So I want to be careful with what I say, but suffice to say, we are very hopeful there can be a transition in Venezuela, and we, the CIA, is doing its best to understand the dynamic there so we can communicate to our State Department and to others. The CIA did not immediately respond to the queries. The governments of Mexico and Colombia have yet to comment on Mr. Maduro's remarks, as the State Department spokesperson declined to say if the U.S. was seeking to change the government of Venezuela. In a statement, the spokesperson added the United States joins nations across the hemisphere and call upon the government of Venezuela to live up to its commitments to hold free and fair, credible elections, immediately provide for the immediate and unconditional release of all political prisoners, and tend to the humanitarian needs of the Venezuelan people. The statement added, we call for the government of Venezuela to suspend the National Constituent Assembly. The Venezuelan people spoke in overwhelming numbers in the opposition organized referendum on 16 July. Their voices must not be ignored. We prepare to take a strong, swift economic actions if the government of Venezuela elections move forward on July 30th with the Constituent Assembly. So there's a lot of interesting claims about these hints about the CIA's getting involved. And it's interesting because there was a law that was signed by President Barack Obama. All right? And it says here the Venezuela Defense of Human Rights and Civil Society Act of 2014. And of course, it's now public law, which is public law number 113-278. All right. So, and I know I brought this up last time. And it's interesting when you look up, when you start really looking up the bigger picture here on what this is about. And come on. And this, I think it's Section 5. Interesting to talk about Section 5. Let's check that out. What Section 5 has to say. Because I know I read it last time. I'll just repeat it. So now that you could get the actual link on here. Sanctions on persons responsible for violence in Venezuela. And let me see, Section 5. Yeah, it is Section 5. It says Section 4 here. U.S. policy toward Venezuela is a policy of the United States. One, to support the people of Venezuela in their aspiration to live under conditions of peace and representative democracy as defined in the Inter-American Democratic Charter of the Organization of the American States. Two, to work in concert with other member states within the Organization of American States, as well as the countries of the European Union, to ensure that the peaceful resolution to the current situation in Venezuela, with the immediate cessation of violence against any government protesters. 3, to hold accountable government and security officials of Venezuela responsible for or complicit in the use of force and retaliation to any government protests and in similar future acts of violence. And 4, to continue support development of democratic political process and independent civil society in Venezuela. It's interesting because when you look at Section 2 again, to work in concert with other members of states within the Organization of American States as well as countries of the European Union, could we say Club of Rome 101? Absolutely. And of course, Section 5, sanctions or persons responsible for violence in Venezuela. A, in general, President shall impose the sanctions described in subsection B with respect to any foreign person, including any current or former official of the government of Venezuela or any person acting on behalf of that government. That president determines, 1, has perpetrated or is responsible for ordering or otherwise directing significant acts of violence or serious human rights abuse in Venezuela against a person associated with any government protests in Venezuela that began on February 4, 2014. 2, has ordered or otherwise directed the arrest or prosecution of a person in Venezuela primarily because of the person's legitimate exercise of freedom of expression or assembly. Or 3, has knowingly, materially assisted, sponsored, or provided significant financial, material, or technological support for goods, services, and support of the commission of the acts. So, so you could say the United States can maybe be sticking their nose where it don't belong. So, especially look at Section 3, sense of Congress regarding anti-government protests in Venezuela, the need to prevent further violence in Venezuela. So, yeah, you read this thing as a whole, so I'm definitely going to add that to the memo. So, can you say the CIA can get involved in this? Yeah, it is very big possibility. I wouldn't be surprised because based on this so-called law, which was signed on December 18, 2014 by Barack Obama. And the Senate bill was originally authored by Robert Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey. So they do have a House version of it and all that as well. So, definitely. So I'm going to add that to the memo, which is under congress.gov, so folks can read this for yourselves, all right? But the whole thing I got to say about this thing was going on in Venezuela, the people over there is doing a decision what's right for them, right for the people's best interest. So, and only thing I could always recommend, make it organic, keep it real. None of these intruders should not be invited. All right, well, next one here. This is actually from the Daily Signal, I think it is. Let me see. I don't know if it's Daily Signal. It's not Daily Signal at all, but Daily Caller. Yeah, it's interesting. This one's from Daily Caller. Freedom of Speech in America. And it came out today by Scott Lazarowitz. Daily Caller has an article about an art professor who run out of town by militant LGBT morons and made to resign from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. According to Daily Caller, Michael Bonesteel was lecturing on a work of Henry Darger when he displayed a particular painting showing young females with male sex organs. Bonesteel suggested that the disturbing scene might indicate that Darger was a victim of sexual abuse as a boy. This theory apparently outraged a transgender student in his class who issued a formal complaint. Now, first of all, this is an art class, not a psychology class. The professor's psychoanalysis doesn't really add up to me. But anyway, it really takes a lot of chutzpah from that student who could actually file a complaint against a professor just because the student felt offended by some little discussion of a painting and its sexual connotations. Young people these days are incredibly narcissistic, and rather than the student trying to deal with his or her trigger-fragile sense of being, instead he or she initiates the process of destroying the professor's career. That's how pathologically selfish many of today's young people are. And then another student made accusations of racism and homophobia against Bonesteel and objected to the teacher not offering advance warning that he was going to say rape during the class discussion. Another complaint was lodged. Can you believe this? You have warned the delicate snowflakes that you might say a word that might trigger something. So these little dysfunctional creeps want to force others of how to be self-conscious of every word they might utter that might offend, trigger, or microaggress. How can anyone live that way? It's nuts. According to the Daily Caller, Bonesteel has since described the Art Institute as having a toxic environment, you think. And working at a college that feels more like a police state than a place where academic freedom and open exchange of ideas is valued. The colleges and universities used to be places where freedom of speech is flourished and where there was actual tolerance of various forms of speech that some people might have thought to be offensive, but not no more, unfortunately. One problem with young people is that so many of them are now brainwashed with irrational beliefs and assertions. They act like trained robots responding to the official offensive speech of the day, or anything remotely similar to that. Unfortunately, many faculty and college administrators are going along with the fascist anti-free speech persecution of those who may not have neurotically planned every single word and syllable precisely in a way that would be permissible every second of the day in the classroom or outside the classroom. Do we really want a society in which everyone must be completely conscious of every word is saying or might say for fear that some moron might report us to the authorities? In Germany during the 1930s and 40s, it wasn't just a secret police that people feared. Germans were encouraged to report on their neighbors, co-workers, and family members any kind of speech or behavior that could be considered disloyal to the regime. Although, according to historian Professor Robin Galatly, the motivation of many Germans for reporting on people, including jealousy, greed, and others, petty differences. Why does this seem that is happening all over again? But this time it isn't. Loyalty to the regime, except when Obama was the dear leader, of course, but adherence to idiotic political correctness and obsession with race and gender. The brainwashing includes denying that human beings consist of two and only two sexes, male and female, and viciously enforce bias against white males as well as this extra protection for little snots from hearing triggering words or phrases, particularly in the racial area. All this made up transgender stuff, and yes, that's all made up. No one is transgender, but there are people who are confused about their actual gender, or in denial of it, which is probably a part of a larger confusion about themselves and their lives in general. And I have the right of freedom of speech to express my views about that. By the way, just as any college student or otherwise young person has a right to question today's irrational, politically correct speech codes and not be punished for it. Which brings me to the people who have more power over the rest of us, some pathetic fascists on college campuses, the U.S. Congress. What are they up to now? On behalf of AIPAC, Congress is set to pass restrictions of what Americans may or may not say or think about Israel. According to Glenn Greenwald and Ryan Grimm, the bill is to criminalize support for the international boycott of Israel, making that a felony, and those who violate the law will face a minimum civil penalty of $250,000 and a maximum criminal penalty of $1 million and a 20 years in prison. What the hell is that all about? And it is on the Intercept, by the way. It came out the 19th of July. And you can read this for yourself. So, you can't boycott Israel. You guys are anti-Semitic. Up yours, you bunch of treasonous pieces of garbage. And I'm going to continue on here. The article points out that the bill has many sponsors in both House and Senate, and so far not one member of Congress has denounced the any freedom of speech. That's because many of them are gutless wonders, and they know that any criticism of Israel causes one to be accused of anti-Semitism or Holocaust denial, accused of reflexively by ignorant people who do not seem actually to think about what the critic has said. Can we say New World Order 101? Now, I'm not part of any boycotting campaign. However, I do think that the U.S. government should cut all foreign aid to Israel and every other country because the U.S. Constitution does not authorize the federal government to distribute the U.S. Treasury funds to foreigners. It also doesn't authorize the government to have its military bases and troops stationed on any other foreign territory that is not U.S. territory. So all U.S. foreign military bases need to be closed down and all U.S. troops need to return to the U.S., but I digress. You see, the campaign of criminalized speech won't stop at just supporting a boycott against Israel. It will then include any criticism of Israel in any way which some countries have attempted to outlaw or have outlawed, such as Canada and France. I've already written plenty of criticism of Israel and Zionism, including explaining why I'm not a Zionist. A lot of this is online. My criticisms are legitimate, and those who feel offended can write their own criticism in response rather than send speech police after me. In America, the so-called founders seriously believe in the protection of free speech, thought, and conscience, and the protection of the people's criticism of government officials, of the regime, of noteworthy public figures, of religion and religious figures, and of other social matters and norms and other countries. This is why earlier Americans wrote the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It might be helpful for members of Congress and college professors and students to take a long look at the Constitution at some literature that has been written about the First Amendment and freedom of speech, because eventually they will see their own views and expressions suppressed or criminalized by the people in power later on. You know what? You are absolutely correct, and I gotta give her credit for this or Scott for this. Excuse me, Scott. Give him credit for this because the man is absolutely correct. When it comes to freedom of speech, that includes unpopular ones. People get offended. I could care less. This is why my freedom of speech is more important than your feelings. Oh, I'm so offended. How dare you say that about that? I'm going to call the police. I'm going to call these people. And I'm going to call the nannies because I'm so sensitive. You know what? You're the ones who are a bunch of cowards. You're the ones who are a bunch of ungrateful parasites based on these actions. It doesn't mean you can reconsider and learn and see the bigger picture and realize your natural born rights are righteous. That those are the ones I may be critical of. Absolutely. This is very essential when it comes to freedom of speech. So, because even some of the founding fathers did talk about that on freedom of speech. And one very good example was George Washington. I think it was very important because during that time, my friends, George Washington was president, and in New York they had a big rally. Someone burned an effigy of him, and his subordinates go, "Mr. President, they're burning an effigy of you. What should we do?" That person has a right to free speech. Let it be. And one of the great quotes he made was this: "If freedom of speech is taken away, then the dumb and silent, we may be led like the sheep to the slaughter." I'll say that one more time. If the freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent, we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. So all you little sensitive ones out there, better pay close attention and comprehend this through your weak and pathetic minds. But like I said before, you can break this spell. You can enhance yourselves, better yourselves. So he's not going after you as a person, but your attributes, your actions is completely deplorable. But you can make a difference. Like every single one of us. We all have our falters, absolutely. We have our flaws. But you can conquer them. Be inspired. Don't just run like Sweet Pie Purebred. Underdog, help me. I can't get laid. I can't even clean my own behind. What I'm going to be doing, I'm going to add a video to this called about political correctness. And Mike Adams did a segment on this, and it's very good. I have to say, it was a real good video on what is happening now with this, for an example, to the student, the college professor at the Art Institute of Chicago. Completely unacceptable, as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah, I'm just going to put that in there. Oh, there it is. One moment. Yeah, I should have done this earlier, so bear with me. Come on. But, and I'll be right back. Okay, cool. I got that added to the footnotes. And the video is entitled PC, Language Control, and the Rise of the Third Reich. So a little history lesson that folks you should check out, and you won't be disappointed. And it's a great learning experience. And Mike Adams does a good job in these areas. So check it out. Enhance yourselves, right? Absolutely. Hey, I'm still learning to this day, my friend, so I'm not a know-it-all, okay? Well, finally, this one came out on CNS News. CNS News came out today. I think it's from Daily Signal. Yeah, I'm not too crazy about that cite daily signals, especially, they're too much like, she's pretty unidimensional, but doesn't mean they're always bad. So, however, it says here, another gun rights victory. Fed appeals court strikes down concealed carry restriction. This is by Elizabeth Slattery. Came out today, this morning, a few hours ago. It says here, on Tuesday, the D.C. Court of Appeals struck down the District of Columbia's law requiring applicants for a concealed carry permit to demonstrate a special need for self-protection, distinguishable from the general community. The Supreme Court previously struck down the D.C.'s ban on possession of handguns in the landmark case D.C. versus Heller in 2008, and the District Court invalidated D.C.'s ban on carrying handguns in Palmer versus D.C. in 2014. Thereafter, D.C. Council enacted a severely limiting concealed carry permits to applicants alleging serious threats of death and of serious bodily harm, living or the works in the high crime areas is not sufficient reason. 2-1 decision reviewing the dueling lower court rulings. A D.C. Circuit panel held that violates the Second Amendment and granted challengers permanent injunction against D.C. laws. Judge Thomas Griffith wrote the majority opinion, which first addressed whether the Second Amendment protects the right to carry a handgun for self-defense in public. The majority concluded that even in the absence of showing a special need for defense, it does. In D.C. versus Heller and McDonald versus Chicago, 2012, the Supreme Court held that its core, the Second Amendment protects the individual rights of self-defense, a right predated the Constitution. The Supreme Court evaluated an early case of construing the Second Amendment and looking to those sources. D.C. Circuit panel concluded that this extends to carry a handgun in public for self-defense with some limits. Those limits include licensing requirements prohibiting felons from possessing handguns and barring carrying handguns near sensitive sites such as near schools. The city argued that pre-constitutional history supports its restrictions. The Statute of Northampton, enacted in 1328, prohibited carrying in densely populated areas, and has traveled the colonies in the 1700s. The majority brushed these arguments away, stating, happily, though, the state of the law is charged to England or that matter Shakespeare's or Cromwell's is not decisive here. Heller I hold that time by the foundings of the pre-existing right enshrined in the amendment has ripened to carry more broadly than the district contends based on its reading of the 14th century statute. The majority also conclude that rights to keep and bear arms are equally important despite more frequent restrictions placed on bearings. The next panel addressed which standard of review should apply rational basis, intermediate, or strict scrutiny. Other appeals court, including the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 9th circuits, have applied intermediate scrutiny to similar laws, but the D.C. Circuit panel took the lead from the Supreme Court Heller, which found that a complete ban on Second Amendment rights are invalid, making it unnecessary to decide which levels of scrutiny applies. The majority concluded such analysts could ever sanction liberations or enumerated constitutional rights. So it's more enumerated, but it's more technically talking about the Ninth Amendment, which is good natural law. D.C. laws, the majority explained it is necessary total ban on most D.C. residents' right to carry a gun in the face of ordinary self-defense needs, where these residents are no more danger with the gun than the next law-abiding citizen. Indeed, the class of citizens who can wield arms must include those with common levels of competence and responsibility and need. The majority quipped that the Second Amendment doesn't secure a right to have some chance at self-defense, since the law essentially prohibits some people from exercising their right to carry a gun. It was akin to the virtual ban the Supreme Court struck down in Heller. Judge Karen LaCraft Henderson dissented, stating that she agrees with other appeals court that have held Second Amendment does not protect a right outside the home. Well, she's full of crap, as far as I'm concerned. She would have upheld D.C.'s law because it does not affect firearm possession within the home and there does not impose a substantial burden upon the core Corps of Riot Self-Defense. In her view, the law should not only be subject to any scrutiny because D.C. is unique, given the number of government buildings where firearms are prohibited, she should defer to the judgment of the D.C. Council members that decided this regulation was necessary and appropriate. But as Griffith explained in the majority opinion, we are bound to leave the district as much space to regulate as the Constitution allows, but no more. Though the D.C. Circuit panel concluded that laws like D.C.'s flunk any judicial test that was appropriately written and applied, several other appeals courts have disagreed, ruling in favor of concealed carry restrictions that amount to virtual bans. This tees up to the issue for Supreme Court review. The justices declined to take up Petro v. California case challenging similar good reason requirements for concealed carry permits over the protest of Judge Clarence Thomas and Neil Grosh. Thomas wrote in dissent that it is extremely implorable that the framers understood the Second Amendment to protect little more than carrying a gun from the bedroom to the kitchen. If D.C. ultimately asked the Supreme Court to take the case, perhaps the justices will be ready to review issues since there is a split among the lower courts. In the meantime, the city will likely ask the full D.C. Circuit to rehearse the case. So, very interesting. It's going to be a little battle in this area. And something that really boggles the mind. But one thing you got to look at is how their rhetoric supersedes your natural-born rights. It doesn't. It is completely inappropriate, unacceptable, null and void. And in addition, the D.C. police aren't obligated to protect you as an individual. They don't have those special duties on safeguarding you. Sovereign immunity and tort liability. You got to throw that at them. All right? That's one of the things I'll always harp on. And, of course, D.C. is a federal city, right? Yeah, it is. According to their Constitution, it is a federal city. So, you know what? You got to go with the Second and Ninth Amendments to the U.S. Constitution and the right of privacy, you know? So, they're trying to take guns, ban guns, that violates the Fourth Amendment as well. So, you know what? Too bad. In People's District of Columbia, the city council there's nothing more than a bunch of buffoons that believe that natural law doesn't prevail because they're the elected servants, but they come to be the masturbators. So you know what? So right here, I'm glad this happened because as far as I'm concerned, too, with the concealed carry permits, it's a privilege, not a right. And that is it. I know it took a little long, but, it's one of those moods, I would say. I'd like to thank everyone for listening, plus feel free to download and share this throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or you want to send me something that's interesting you might want to check out, whatever you do, please send your correspondences with decorum. You can hit me on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Tumblr, YouTube, Freedoms Network, Scene.life, Minds.com, FutureNet.club, or Patreon.com/LokiLuck3, which is 3 eyes all together. If you want to donate money, you hit that site in your comments there as well. In addition, you can email me at LokiLuck3@gmail.com or Cryptid Ones. The fans, supporters, I love that. I like to keep everything hush-hush. Loki Luck, numbers 03@protonmail.com. And just to let you folks know, I have played, the song I played was by TeknoAXE, Angry Angus. Pretty cool. So, royalty-free music. I will add that to the footnotes as well. Check it out, man. You got some cool stuff. Got some good stuff. So, entertainment. And that is it. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that the demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.